The galaxy had always prided itself on strength. Empires rose and fell on the edge of starfire, and survival was earned through teeth, claws, and fleets of warships that stretched from one horizon to the next. Yet there came a time when a race, unlike any other, reached out, not with weapons, not with power, but with trembling hands, begging for protection. They were not warriors. They were not conquerors. They were outcasts, fragile in body, delicate in nature, and branded by the rest of the galaxy as a burden. Their voices carried no threat, only desperation. And in the vast silence of space, there was only one species who answered their call: humanity. It began with a signal, a faint transmission drifting across the Black Sea between stars, carried. On old frequencies, most civilizations had long abandoned. At first it seemed like nothing, static, background noise. But human explorers had a habit of listening where others did not. They caught the whisper, decoded it, and discovered words that shook them to their core. The plea was simple: help us. We have no one else. No empire in the galaxy had bothered to respond. To them, this race was nothing but a weak link, a liability better left forgotten. But humanity was different. For centuries, humans had been underestimated. They were dismissed as latecomers to the interstellar stage, fragile compared to armored giants, primitive compared to ancient civilizations. Yet history had proven again and again that humans thrived not by strength of body, but by heart, by will, by the unyielding refusal to turn away from those in need. And so, when the forgotten aliens cried out, it was humanity that answered. The first meeting was strange and tense. The outcast race, known only by a soft, flowing name that carried like wind through leaves, looked nothing like the galaxy's champions. They were small, fragile-boned, with eyes that seemed always on the verge of tears. They carried no weapons, no defenses, nothing but stories of the torment they had suffered at the hands of stronger species. Where others saw weakness, humans saw something different: innocence, a mirror of their own forgotten past when they too had once been vulnerable, at the mercy of greater powers. The aliens had been driven from world to world, hunted not for what they possessed, but simply for what they were. Their skills, their art, their gentle way of life had no place in a galaxy that valued conquest. Whole fleets had passed them by, offering no aid. Their colonies had been burned, their homes shattered, until they had no choice but to wander the stars, seeking anyone who would hear them. They had expected silence. Instead, they found humanity. It was not an easy decision for Earth. To protect the outcasts meant challenging ancient empires who already saw humanity as a nuisance, a rising power that should have stayed quiet. Leaders debated. Governments argued. But among the people, there was no hesitation. Images of the aliens spread across human networks, soft-eyed, trembling, speaking words of gratitude with voices that cracked. Something in humanity stirred, something old, something fierce. People remembered what it felt like to be overlooked, underestimated, cast aside. And in that reflection, they made their choice. "We will protect you," humanity said. And those words carried more weight than the outcasts could have imagined. Ships were sent, not just with soldiers, but with doctors, engineers, and teachers. Where the outcasts had only known fear, they now found walls raised for their defense, food grown for their survival, and voices telling them they were not alone anymore. For the first time in generations, they slept without the terror of annihilation. They looked upon the humans with awe, not because of their power, but because of their compassion. But compassion was never safe in a galaxy that thrived on power. Whispers began to spread through the stars. Why would humanity waste resources protecting such a weak race? What could possibly be gained? Suspicion grew. Rivals watched. And soon, threats came. Ships that once ignored the outcasts now turned their attention to Earth. Enemies who had underestimated humanity began to sharpen their knives, eager to test whether humans truly had the strength to shield what others had discarded. The first confrontation was not on some distant battlefield, but in orbit above a nameless colony where the outcasts had taken shelter under human banners. A fleet arrived, cold, merciless, and armed to erase the fragile beings once and for all. But when they descended, they did not find helplessness. They found human warships waiting, their hulls scarred from old battles but their weapons ready. And for the first time, the galaxy realized humanity did not bluff. Still, the danger only grew. Protecting the outcasts meant war on many fronts, with enemies stronger, older, and more ruthless than anything humanity had ever faced. Some believed it was a hopeless cause. Some argued that humanity should abandon them before it was too late. Yet when the question was asked, when the outcasts stood trembling, afraid that their new guardians might walk away like all the others had, humanity's answer was clear. We don't abandon family. That promise changed everything. The outcasts, once seen as fragile, began to transform. Under humanity's protection, they grew stronger, not in muscle, not in weapons, but in spirit. They learned to stand, to hope, to believe that perhaps, even in a cruel galaxy, kindness could endure. And humanity, in defending them, discovered something too. They discovered that their greatest power was not in their fleets or their weapons, but in the simple, stubborn refusal to let the weak be crushed by the strong. But the galaxy was not content to watch. Whispers turned into alliances. Alliances into threats, and threats into plans. The empires that had ignored the outcasts now conspired to strike not just at them, but at humanity itself. For by protecting the helpless, humans had revealed something dangerous. They had revealed that strength did not always lie in conquest, and that terrified those who had built their thrones on fear. As fleets moved in the dark, as enemies prepared their strike, the outcasts looked to humanity once more, their fragile voices shaking. Could this truly be the end? Had they doomed the only friends they had ever known? And as the stars trembled with the approach of war, humanity stood at the edge of history, ready to answer not just with words, but with fire. The story had only begun. The galaxy had cast them aside, called them helpless, worthless, forgotten. But now, under humanity's banner, the outcasts would rise. And the galaxy was about to learn a lesson it would never forget. Because when you come for the weak, you face the strong. And when you face humanity, you face the impossible. But the question remained, would even humanity's strength be enough when the full fury of the galaxy came crashing down? And in that silence, as the stars grew darker, one truth hung heavy in the void. Something was coming. Something vast. Something unstoppable. The plea for protection had been answered, but the true cost had yet to be revealed. Humanity had made its promise, but promises carried weight heavier than steel. The outcast race was now under their shield, and that meant their fate was tied to Earth's future. The galaxy had already begun whispering about the decision, watching every move with sharpened curiosity. Old powers remembered how humans had, once laughed in the face of empires far greater than themselves, and now they waited for the chance to see humanity stumble. But behind the public speeches and military shows of force, the truth was more complicated. The outcasts had been granted shelter on colonies far from Earth itself, quiet places where humanity hoped they could rebuild in peace. Yet peace never came easily. The aliens, gentle and fragile in both body and spirit, carried wounds older than their memory. They struggled to believe that their new guardians would not one day abandon them like all the others. Many were hesitant to leave their shelters, afraid even of the shadows of passing human ships. Children flinched at the sound of engines, believing it meant another fleet had come to burn their homes. Humanity saw this and felt a sharp anger rise within them, not at the aliens, but at the cruelty that had made them this way. Doctors, teachers, and engineers worked tirelessly to ease their fears. Human soldiers were told to walk without their helmets, to kneel when speaking, to soften their voices so as not to seem like another enemy. Slowly, very slowly, trust began to form. The outcasts had no word for hope, not in the way humans did, but they learned it by watching. They saw humans laugh even in danger, argue even when tired, and stand unyielding even when outnumbered. That spirit was alien to them, yet comforting. It was something they clung to like a fire in the night. But not all humans agreed with the decision to protect them. On Earth and across the colonies, voices grew louder. Why waste our resources? Why risk war for those who cannot fight for themselves? Some argued that humanity's rise to power had only just begun, and now it was being gambled away on a hopeless cause. Others feared that by shielding the outcasts, they had painted a target on their own backs. And perhaps, in a way, they were right. Far from Earth, fleets stirred. Ancient civilizations that had ignored the outcasts now began to notice. They remembered human stubbornness, the way these newcomers had once fought wars they should have lost. To them, humanity's protection of the weak was not a noble act, but a dangerous one. For if the idea spread, if compassion became a weapon, then the balance of power across the stars would shatter. That was something the old empires could not allow. Meanwhile, deep within the alien race itself, secrets lingered. They had called, themselves helpless, claimed they had nothing left but sorrow, yet small pieces of their story did not align. There were whispers among the refugees, broken fragments of a history they dared not speak aloud. Some humans noticed it in their art, strange symbols that repeated again and again, symbols that did not belong to a species without power. Others noticed it in their songs, haunting melodies that carried patterns too precise to be simple laments. The more humanity helped them, the more the question grew. Were they truly as helpless as they appeared? Or was there something more hidden beneath their fragile surface? The answer did not come easily. When human researchers asked, the aliens would look away, their large eyes filled with unease. "It is better forgotten?" they whispered. But forgetting was something humans were never good at. They dug deeper, searching through the ruins of destroyed colonies, scanning the wreckage of ships, piecing together fragments of data. What they discovered unsettled them. The outcasts had once possessed knowledge that was not of war, but of creation. Energy patterns unknown to human science, biological designs that could not be explained. They had not been warriors, but creators, and perhaps that was why they had been hunted. As humanity pieced together the puzzle, enemies moved closer. Fleets appeared at the edges of human space, their presence silent but unmistakable. Probes vanished, colonies reported strange signals, and captains whispered of shadows trailing them through the void. The galaxy was preparing, waiting for the moment when humanity would falter, when the outcasts could be ripped away and erased once and for all. On the new colony worlds, the outcasts began to sense it too. They felt the tension in the air, saw the way human soldiers trained harder, spoke less, and kept their weapons within reach. Fear returned, and many of the aliens begged humanity to let them flee once again, to wander the stars until they were forgotten. But humanity refused. "Running will not save you," they said. "We stand together now." And yet, doubts lingered even among the humans themselves. In hidden chambers where leaders met, arguments raged. Could they truly withstand the wrath of the galaxy for the sake of a single fragile race? Was this choice noble, or was it reckless? Some demanded the outcasts reveal the truth about their past. Others argued that humanity had already chosen, and there was no turning back. The decision was heavy, and every voice knew that the wrong choice could mean extinction. The outcasts, sensing the division, grew more desperate. A few among them began to speak of things long buried, ancient oaths and forgotten betrayals. Their race had not always been outcasts, they admitted. Once, long ago, they had stood at the heart of the galaxy, not with armies, but with knowledge. They had been teachers, healers, creators of wonders that other civilizations envied, and for that very reason, they had been marked for destruction. Power was not always in weapons. Sometimes it was in the ideas that shaped the stars themselves, and those ideas had made them a target. Humanity listened, and the weight of the choice grew heavier. If this was true, then protecting the outcasts was not just about saving a weak race, it was about defying the old powers who feared knowledge itself. By standing with them, humanity was declaring more than compassion. They were declaring rebellion against the very order of the galaxy. Tension built with every passing day. Human fleets patrolled the borders, soldiers drilled until exhaustion, and whispers of war filled every corner. Yet in the quiet moments, when human children played alongside outcast children, when laughter echoed across the refugee colonies, there was something more powerful than fear. There was a bond forming, one that no empire could break. But bonds did not stop fleets, and compassion did not halt the march of war. In the distance, lights moved through the void, fleets gathering, preparing, waiting. The galaxy was about to test humanity's resolve, to see if they would truly stand by their words when fire rained down. And though humanity stood ready, there was one question they could not yet answer. If the outcasts were once creators of wonders, then what had they created that terrified the galaxy so much? That mystery remained, silent and heavy, as humanity braced for what was to come. The signal had been answered, the promise had been made, but the true storm had only just begun, and somewhere in the darkness of space, a power older than all of them was beginning to stir. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the first shot to be fired. And when it came, the galaxy would never be the same again. The shadows of war grew longer with every passing cycle, and though the colonies of the outcasts now thrived under human protection, no one could ignore the storm brewing beyond the stars. Fleets gathered in silence, ancient empires whispering to one another in dark corridors, planning how best to crush the bond between humanity and the fragile race they had chosen to defend. To the galaxy, this alliance was not simply strange, it was dangerous. For the first time in ages, someone had dared to challenge the unspoken rule, that the weak must remain weak, and the forgotten must remain forgotten. Humanity had broken that rule, and now they would be made to pay. The first cracks appeared not in battles, but in politics. On Earth, dissenting voices grew louder. Why risk everything? They asked. Why stand against powers that could overwhelm us with a single fleet? Across the colonies, protests spread. Some feared that the outcasts brought nothing but doom with them, that humanity had inherited their enemies simply by offering a hand. The outcasts, sensitive to every shift in tone, heard the whispers and began to withdraw again, retreating into themselves. Fear returned to their eyes, undoing much of the trust they had begun to place in their human protectors. Yet even as doubt spread, bonds continued to deepen in quieter places. In the refugee settlements, human farmers taught the outcasts how to grow crops suited to their fragile bodies, adjusting soil and climate until fields bloomed where only ash had once remained. In workshops, human engineers invited them to watch as machines were repaired, explaining each step slowly, carefully, until curiosity began to win against fear. And in the evenings, when the stars hung low and silence fell, stories were exchanged. The outcasts spoke of their lost worlds in voices so soft they almost vanished in the wind, and the humans answered with tales of Earth, its mountains, its oceans, its own long history of survival. From these small exchanges, a quiet bond grew, stronger, even as the galaxy sharpened its knives. The military watched with wary eyes. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture. Fleets moving in formation near human borders, strange signals pulsing through the void, spies infiltrating colonies with words designed to divide. Captains of warships held councils in the dark, debating how far humanity could stretch before it broke. Some believed a first strike was the only way forward, to prove strength before enemies could gather. Others argued that humanity's role was not to attack, but to endure, to show that their protection was unyielding no matter the cost. These debates carved fault lines within the very heart of the defense forces, cracks that could widen at the worst possible moment. Among the outcasts, other conflicts brewed. While most of their people clung to humanity for safety, there were whispers of dissent among them too. Some believed humanity's protection was temporary, that one day even these strange allies would abandon them when the price grew too high. Others wondered if revealing their lost knowledge, the secrets that had once made them targets, might offer humanity the strength needed to survive what was coming. But their elders forbade it. They had sworn long ago never to let that knowledge be unleashed again. To them, the risk of repeating the past was greater than any hope it could bring. This silence, however, only deepened humanity's suspicion that something crucial was being withheld. Amid these tensions, smaller stories unfolded. A young human officer assigned to guard the refugees found himself drawn to their art, paintings filled with shapes and colors unlike anything Earth had ever seen. He noticed repeating patterns in their designs, and though they seemed like mere decoration, his trained eye recognized something else. Maps. He began to suspect that hidden within their art lay a record of something greater, perhaps a forgotten technology, or a path to a secret the galaxy desperately wanted buried. "But when," he asked, the aliens lowered their heads and said nothing. Elsewhere, a human doctor working with the outcasts discovered something even stranger. Their biology carried markers, genetic structures that should have been impossible. These markers suggested they had once been engineered, shaped not by nature, but by deliberate design. If true, then someone, somewhere, had wanted them to exist, exactly as they were. But who would create a race so fragile, and why had the galaxy been so determined to erase them? The questions spread through research stations, sparking arguments and theories, but no answers. In the halls of human leadership, the tension boiled over. Some leaders demanded answers from the outcasts, insisting that if humanity was to risk war for them, they must reveal everything they knew. Others pushed back, warning that forcing them would only destroy the fragile trust that had been built. The debate raged endlessly, until the very council itself began to fracture. For the first time, unity faltered and cracks spread across the foundation of humanity's promise. And all, the while the enemy drew closer, human fleets reported near misses with unidentified ships, their signals masked, their intent unmistakable. Colonies began to vanish from communication networks, silence replacing the voices that once filled the air. Refugees whispered that this was only the beginning, that soon the storm would fall on them all. Yet humanity stood firm, unwilling to let fear dictate their choices. Even so, each disappearance weighed heavier than the last, a reminder that time was running out. The outcasts, though fragile, were not blind. They saw the strain in their human protectors' faces, the way soldiers carried themselves more rigidly, the way leaders spoke with urgency edged in fear. Some among them began to question if their very existence was worth such sacrifice. Whispers of leaving spread, taking ships and fleeing into the endless void once more, believing it better to vanish than to bring ruin upon those who had shown them kindness. But others resisted, insisting that for the first time in their long history, they had found a people willing to stand by them, and that abandoning humanity would be the greatest betrayal of all. Amid these conflicting voices, an old truth began to surface. The outcasts carried within them not just fear, but memory, deep, buried knowledge of what had once been. A few among them began to break their silence, speaking in hushed tones of ancient creations, of wonders that could bend the very fabric of energy and matter. They spoke of being hunted not because they were weak, but because once, long ago, they had been too important, too influential. And in that importance, the galaxy had seen only danger. Humanity, hearing these fragments, began to realize the scope of what they had stepped into. The true conflict was no longer only about protection. It was about history itself, about secrets buried so deep that entire civilizations had conspired to erase them. Humanity's choice had placed them at the center of this forgotten war, and the cost of uncovering the truth might be greater than anyone imagined. But there was no turning back. The outcasts had called, humanity had answered, and now the galaxy was closing in. Fleets gathered at the edges of human space, silent and watchful, waiting for the moment to strike. And in the quiet before the storm, every soldier, every leader, every refugee knew the same truth. The first blow would fall soon, and when it did, the fate of both races would hang in the balance. The question that lingered in every heart was simple, yet terrifying. Could humanity's strength, born of compassion and defiance, withstand the full weight of a galaxy that had already decided the outcasts must not survive? Or would the promise made in hope crumble under the fire of war? The stars offered no answer. Only silence, heavy and waiting. The galaxy had grown too quiet. That silence, stretching across the stars, pressed down on every ship and every colony that carried the banners of humanity. Soldiers learned to recognize it, the way predators learn to sense the moment before a strike. Fleets that once traveled openly now vanished into the void, their signals masked. Border patrols reported, phantom echoes, fleets appearing on their scanners, then fading as if they had never been there. The void itself seemed to whisper that something vast and terrible was gathering, and all humanity could do was prepare. On the refugee colonies, the outcasts could feel it too. They had no weapons, no armies, but their instincts told them the same thing. The storm was coming. Children clung to their parents, trembling when the sky rumbled with the passing of human warships. Elders sat in silence, their wide eyes staring at the stars as if remembering a terror they had seen before. Whispers spread among them, whispers of the first time their people had been hunted and how the galaxy had shown no mercy. Humanity had promised them protection, but fear was difficult to silence. Even trust could falter under the shadow of extinction. Human leaders faced a problem even heavier than enemy fleets: doubt. Protests grew louder on Earth, voices demanding to know why humanity should risk annihilation for a people who had brought nothing but trouble. On the colonies, the same questions spread. Is it worth it? What do they offer us? Why must we carry their burden? These questions found their way into the ranks of the military, and though no soldier would admit it aloud, the doubts hung in the air like smoke, and the outcasts, hearing every word, shrank deeper into their shelters, terrified that humanity might change its mind. Yet amid the fear there were sparks of defiance. On one of the colonies, a group of human farmers who had grown close to the outcasts built a great signal tower, its beacon reaching into the night sky. "Let them come," they said. "We will not hide." On another world, soldiers painted, the outcasts' symbols on their armor, declaring them kin. These small acts spread faster than any speech could, giving the refugees something they had never truly felt before: belonging. Still, belonging alone would not stop what was coming. The military continued to piece together fragments of truth. Scouts recovered wreckage from skirmishes at the edge of human space, twisted metal marked with the colors of empires older than Earth itself. Reports grew darker. These empires were not only watching, they were aligning. Old enemies, once divided, were now uniting under a single goal: to crush humanity before their defiance spread like fire. The leaders called it what it was: a coalition of fear. For the galaxy feared not humanity's weapons, but their ideas. Protecting the weak threatened the very order that had ruled the stars for millennia. If humanity could succeed, then others might rise too, and that thought terrified the ancient powers more than any fleet. In hidden chambers, councils argued endlessly. Some demanded a first strike to scatter the enemy before they gathered in full force. Others insisted humanity must hold its ground to prove it was not the aggressor. Every hour wasted in debate was another hour closer to the storm. The outcasts, sensing the urgency, finally broke their silence. A group of their elders came forward, speaking words they had once sworn to bury forever. They revealed fragments of their past. Not soldiers, not rulers, but creators. They had once built wonders that bent energy itself, technologies that shaped worlds, medicines that defied time. And it was for these gifts that the galaxy had turned against them, afraid of what their creations might do if left unchecked. The revelation sent shockwaves through humanity. If it was true, then the outcasts were not merely helpless. They were dangerous, not by intent, but by the fear they inspired in others. Humanity had not only inherited their enemies, but their secrets. Scientists begged for access to what little knowledge the outcasts still carried, arguing it might hold the key to survival. The elders resisted, fearing that the cycle would only repeat, that their gifts, once again, would become weapons. But others among their people disagreed. Some younger voices whispered that perhaps humanity could be trusted where no one else had been, that maybe the knowledge could finally serve to protect rather than destroy. This division spread like cracks through their fragile society, and humans could only watch, knowing that whatever choice was made would shape the war to come. In the cold void of space, fleets began to move. Probes reported hundreds of ships, gathering at the borders of human space, their engines burning silently as they assembled for war. Entire constellations flickered as their formations blotted out the stars. Humanity had fought before, but never against a force like this. The coalition of empires had united for one reason only: to shatter humanity's defiance and erase the outcasts once and for all. And they were ready to unleash their fury. On the eve of their approach, the colonies fell silent. Human soldiers stood guard, their weapons primed, while families and refugees huddled together in makeshift shelters. Commanders sent final messages home, knowing that many would not return. The outcasts walked among them, their soft hands trembling as they touched the armor of their protectors, whispering words of gratitude in voices so faint they barely carried. For them, this was not just a battle for survival. It was the final chance to prove that trust had not been misplaced. Yet beneath the fear, there was something else building, a determination that no fleet, no empire could erase. Humans had seen it before in their own history, in moments when they had been outnumbered, outgunned, yet refused to kneel. That same fire now spread through every soldier, every citizen, every refugee who looked to the stars. It was not arrogance, but resolve. Humanity did not fight for conquest or pride. They fought because they had given their word, and to break it would mean breaking themselves. Still, the question remained: could resolve alone stand against the might of the galaxy? Scouts returned with chilling reports, enemy fleets numbering in the thousands, weapons capable of tearing through planetary shields, commanders who had fought for centuries. Humanity was clever, adaptable, unyielding, but the numbers were staggering. To many it felt less like a battle and more like the edge of extinction. Tension grew unbearable as the fleets drew closer. Communication lines crackled with urgent orders. Warships took their positions at the borders, their hulls gleaming in the light of distant suns. On Earth, people watched in silence as the broadcasts flickered across their screens, showing the endless armadas assembling beyond human space. The outcasts gathered in prayer, though they had no gods left to call upon, only the fragile hope that humanity would not falter. The night before the first clash, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Refugees could not sleep. Soldiers sharpened their blades and checked their weapons again and again, and commanders stared at maps of the stars, knowing that within hours they would either write history or vanish into it. The silence pressed heavier with each moment, broken only by the faint hum of engines and the steady beat of hearts unwilling to surrender. And then, in the darkness of the void, the first signals came. Enemy ships had crossed into human space, thousands of them, their formation flawless, their intent unmistakable. Humanity's defenders braced, their voices rising on open channels, not in fear, but in defiance. The outcasts, huddled in their shelters, clutched one another and waited. The climax had not yet begun, but it was moments away. The galaxy was moving against them, the storm at their gates. And as the fleets closed in, one truth blazed brighter than the stars themselves. This battle would decide not only the fate of humanity and the outcasts, but the very order of the galaxy. The first shot had not yet been fired, but everyone knew it was coming. And when it did, the universe itself would tremble. The fleets were closing in, their engines burning across the void like a wall of fire. Humanity stood ready, their ships aligned, their colonies braced, every soldier and refugee, holding their breath for the storm to break. Yet just as the tension reached its breaking point, something no one expected happened. Before the first shot was fired, strange signals rippled through the darkness, bursts of code, patterns too complex to be coincidence. They came not from the coalition of enemy fleets, nor from humanity's defenders, but from deep within the outcasts' own refugee colonies. At first, commanders thought it was sabotage, a betrayal at the worst possible moment. Systems scrambled to decode the transmissions, expecting coordinates or signals to enemy ships. But as the patterns unraveled, the truth shocked everyone. The outcasts were broadcasting, not surrender, but something else entirely. Hidden within, the signals was knowledge, raw and dangerous, schematics for technologies lost for ages, fragments of energy manipulation techniques beyond anything humanity had ever touched. They had sworn to bury this knowledge forever, yet now, with the galaxy bearing down on them, a faction among the outcasts had chosen to reveal it. The decision split them instantly. Elders screamed in fear, begging the humans to shut it down, warning that these secrets were cursed, that they had brought only death to their people before. But the younger voices refused. "If humanity falls, we fall too," they said. "If they fight for us, then they deserve to know what we are." And so the transmissions spread, faster than anyone could contain, echoing through human fleets, downloaded into research stations, igniting arguments and hope in equal measure. For the humans, it was both a gift and a nightmare. Scientists scrambled to decode the schematics, stunned at the possibilities, weapons that could turn enemy shields to dust, engines that could bend space in ways no ship had ever achieved, medicine that could heal wounds once thought fatal. But the data was incomplete, fractured, almost as if pieces had been deliberately erased. Still, even fragments promised power beyond imagination, and with enemy fleets only hours away, the temptation to use it became unbearable. This revelation spread panic through the coalition of empires. Their spies intercepted the transmissions too, and in that moment, their unity began to fracture. Some demanded the fleet's attack at once, before humanity could harness the knowledge. Others hesitated, fearing that if they struck too late, they would face not just human defiance, but human mastery of the very power that had once terrified the galaxy. Whispers of betrayal ran through their ranks. And though their armada still advanced, cracks had appeared in its foundation. On the human side, the conflict deepened. Military leaders argued bitterly. Some wanted to integrate the Outcast's knowledge immediately, to unleash new weapons against the incoming armada. Others warned that the technology was unstable, untested, and could just as easily destroy them as save them. The council fractured once more, with voices rising, shouting that hesitation would doom them all. At the same time, messages from Earth flooded in. Ordinary people begging the leaders not to abandon morality, not to become the very monsters they were fighting against. Humanity stood at a crossroads, caught between fear and faith. The outcasts themselves were no less divided. Families turned against one another, elders insisting that they had condemned themselves by revealing their ancient knowledge, the young insisting that hiding it had only ensured their destruction before. A fragile people, already scarred by centuries of exile, now tore themselves apart in desperate debate. And in the midst of their arguing, one truth became clear. The galaxy would not forgive this choice. Whether humanity used the knowledge or not, the simple fact that it had been revealed made them a greater threat than ever before. The fleets continued their approach, now with even greater urgency. Humanity scrambled to prepare defenses, but in the chaos, another unexpected revelation emerged. Buried deep within the transmissions, hidden like a scar across the code, was a name, coordinates pointing to a system long abandoned, a place erased from charts. The outcasts had not only shared knowledge, they had pointed the way to something else, something they had left behind. Scouts were dispatched in secret, slipping past the oncoming fleets. What they found was not a ruin, not a tomb, but a vault, massive, ancient, and still humming with power. It had been hidden for generations, forgotten even by most of the outcasts themselves. Inside, there were not only records, but machines, creations left dormant and waiting. What they were, no one yet knew. But their mere existence explained everything. The galaxy had not hunted the outcasts for their fragility. It had hunted them for this, and now humanity had stumbled directly into the heart of the mystery. The discovery changed everything. Commanders realized the coalition's true goal was not merely to erase the outcasts. It was to prevent anyone else from ever touching what they had created. Humanity, by protecting them, had inherited not just enemies, but the key to a buried power that could alter the balance of the galaxy forever. Whether they used it or not, they had become the center of a war that could not be avoided. The news of the vault spread like wildfire, though leaders tried to contain it. Soldiers whispered about hidden weapons. Colonists speculated about miracles that could save them. And enemy spies raced to confirm what was now the most dangerous secret in the galaxy. Trust began to fray. Some humans accused the outcasts of manipulating them from the start, of dragging them into a war they could never win. Others insisted that perhaps fate had led them to this moment, that maybe humanity was meant to carry what the outcasts could not. And still, the fleets drew closer. Thousands of enemy ships, advancing with purpose, determined to crush humanity before they could uncover the full truth of the vault. Every hour brought them nearer. Every signal crackled with tension. Humanity stood on the edge of a choice they could not escape. To embrace the outcasts' lost knowledge and risk becoming the very threat the galaxy feared, or to reject it and stand alone against an enemy too vast to defeat. The tension became unbearable. On the refugee colonies, the outcasts gathered in silent vigils, watching the skies, knowing that their past had caught them at last. On human warships, soldiers gripped their weapons tighter, whispering to one another about the vault, about the power that might yet save them or destroy them. In command rooms, leaders stared at maps of the stars, knowing that within hours the decision would be forced upon them. And then, as the coalition's armada loomed just beyond human space, another shock came. A fragment of transmission, intercepted. From within, the enemy fleets revealed what no one had expected. Not all the empires were united. Some had come not to fight, but to seize the vault for themselves. Betrayal was brewing within their own ranks, and humanity found itself not only caught in the crossfire of survival, but standing at the heart of a conflict that might shatter the galaxy's balance once and for all. The stakes had risen beyond protection, beyond survival. Humanity was no longer defending a fragile race. They were holding the key to a secret so dangerous that every empire in the galaxy would burn worlds to claim it. The storm had not yet broken, but the air was charged with fire. Every soldier, every refugee, every leader could feel it in their bones. The climax was approaching, and when it came, nothing would remain the same. The stars themselves seemed to tremble, as if the universe knew what was about to unfold. Humanity had promised to protect, but now they carried something even greater, a choice that could ignite or end an age. And as the fleets bore down, the question loomed larger than ever. When the first shot was fired, would humanity stand as saviors or become the very nightmare the galaxy feared? The answer hung just beyond reach, heavy in the silence before the storm. The Armada finally breached the edge of human space. Thousands of ships poured into the darkness, their engines glowing like a second constellation, their weapons locked and ready to strike. Human fleets stood in formation, smaller in number, their hulls scarred from years of battles, yet their resolve unbroken. The refugees huddled in their shelters, listening to the comm channels as the voice of war filled the air. The storm humanity had dreaded had come at last. The first volley of fire ripped through the void, tearing open shields and scattering ships like sparks across the night. The enemy pressed forward with overwhelming force, certain of victory. Human. Commanders issued orders with steady voices, though their eyes betrayed the truth. They were facing odds no strategist could truly overcome. Still, every ship fought with ferocity. Fighters streaked through the enemy lines, destroyers locked their cannons, and cruisers stood firm even as their hulls cracked. Humanity fought not as conquerors, but as defenders, unwilling to let the promise they had made be broken. But the coalition was vast, and wave after wave pressed closer, forcing the defenders back toward the colonies. On the ground, soldiers braced for landings, knowing enemy troops would soon breach the skies. Panic spread among the refugees as explosions thundered above, lighting the heavens in burning trails. The outcasts wept, believing history was repeating itself, that once again their presence had doomed those who had tried to protect them. But humanity did not falter. Over open channels, soldiers called out the same words again and again: "We don't abandon family." Even as the fighting reached its peak, a new signal cut through the chaos. It came from the vault, the hidden creation the outcasts had left behind. The machines there, long dormant, were awakening. Energy rippled through the system, disrupting. Scanners, pulling ships off course. The coalition fleet staggered, unsure whether they were facing a natural anomaly or something far worse. Humanity, too, watched in shock as the vault pulsed with life, its systems powering up as though answering to the chaos around it. The outcasts, trembling, realized the truth. The vault had never been a weapon. It was a sanctuary, a creation meant to shield and protect life across the stars. The galaxy had destroyed them out of fear, not of destruction, but of mercy that challenged the rule of power. In that moment, the humans made their choice. Instead of seizing the vault for themselves or unleashing its secrets as a weapon, they connected their ships to its signal and let its systems expand their shields, protecting not just their fleets, but the refugee colonies below. Walls of shimmering energy spread outward, absorbing enemy fire, turning the tide of the battle. Humanity had chosen not domination, but protection, and the vault responded as if it had been waiting for that choice all along. The coalition faltered, Some of their fleets broke formation, uncertain how to fight an enemy that wielded no weapon but a shield that grew stronger with every strike against it. Others pressed forward, desperate to break through, only to be thrown back again and again. Betrayals erupted among them as factions turned on each other, seeking to seize the vault for themselves. The unity that had once made them unstoppable fractured before the eyes of the galaxy. Humanity's defiance had not just held, it had cracked the foundation of an empire built on fear. On the ground, as enemy troops attempted landings, they were met not only by human soldiers but by outcasts who, for the first time, stood beside, their protectors instead of behind them. Fragile though they were, they carried no weapons, only tools, and used them to build barriers, tend to the wounded, and guide civilians to safety. Their presence on the battlefield was not one of strength, but of solidarity, and it gave the human fighters something greater to fight for, the promise of a future where the weak were not forgotten. The battle raged for hours, the sky filled with fire, until the coalition could no longer sustain its assault. Their fleets, torn by betrayal and demoralized by the vault's rising power, began to retreat. Humanity did not chase them. They stood their ground, battered but unbroken, their shields still glowing, their vow still intact. For the first time, the galaxy had witnessed something it could not explain. A victory not won by overwhelming force, but by compassion wielded as strength. Yet just as relief began to spread, the final twist came. From deep within the vault, a final signal emerged, not to the humans, not to the outcasts, but to the galaxy itself. The system broadcast across every frequency, a message so clear it could not be ignored. It revealed what the outcasts had once been, what they had created, and why they had been hunted. It showed that their greatest power had never been weapons, but the ability to unite species, to create sanctuaries where war held no dominion. The vault was not a single structure, but one of many scattered across the stars, hidden and waiting. Humanity's choice to protect had awakened the first, and now the others stirred. The coalition, watching from afar, recoiled in fear. Empires that thrived on conquest realized that their age of rule was ending. The galaxy would no longer belong to those who built their power on fear, but to those who stood for protection and unity. Humanity had not only saved the outcasts, they had ignited a spark that would spread far beyond them. For the outcasts, it was both joy and terror. Their secret was no longer hidden, their burden no longer theirs alone. Humanity had tied their fates together, and the galaxy now saw them not as weak, but as the keepers of something far greater. For humanity, it was a revelation that their role had shifted too. They were no longer just defenders of a fragile race. They had become guardians of a legacy that could reshape the stars. As the smoke cleared and silence returned to the void, human soldiers stood beside the outcasts, their armor scorched, their faces weary, but their spirits unbroken. The galaxy had tried to break them, and instead had shown the universe their true strength. Compassion had won where fear had failed, yet even in victory, uncertainty remained. The vault's signal had awakened more than hope. It had stirred forces older than anyone could imagine, and across the galaxy, others would rise to claim or destroy what had been revealed. Humanity had survived the storm, but the horizon still burned with challenges yet to come. The refugees looked to their human protectors, no longer with fear but with trust. The humans looked back, knowing the promise they had made was far from over. The galaxy had cast the outcasts aside, but humanity had chosen them, and in that choice, they had changed the stars themselves. But somewhere, deep in the void, an ancient voice stirred, older than the empires, older than even the vaults themselves. It had heard the signal. It had waited for it. And as humanity celebrated their hard-won survival, this presence opened its eyes once more. The battle had been won, but the true war was only beginning. The void after battle felt heavier than the battle itself. Wreckage drifted like broken stars. Across human space, silent reminders of what had been endured. Human ships, battered and scorched, moved slowly among the ruins, pulling survivors from shattered hulls, both their own and even their enemies. The coalition fleets had retreated, fractured and bitter, but the scars of their assault remained. Humanity had stood, but at a cost. Lives had been lost, colonies damaged, and a burden heavier than war itself now rested on their shoulders. Outcasts walked among the humans in the aftermath, their fragile hands tending to wounds, their soft voices offering comfort where even hardened soldiers had none left to give. They no longer hid behind shelters or lowered their heads in fear. For the first time, they stood openly, their presence no longer a liability but a symbol of why the battle had been fought. In their eyes was a light that had not been there before, the light of belonging. They were no longer outcasts in truth. They had found a place where they were seen, not for what they lacked, but for what they meant. The vault remained, humming with energy, its secrets laid bare. Scientists from Earth studied its systems with caution, careful not to repeat the mistakes of the past. They discovered that the vaults had been created as networks of protection, sanctuaries spread across the galaxy that could shield entire worlds from destruction. The Outcasts' ancestors had built them not as weapons, but as guardians of life. It was a truth that had cost them everything, because those who ruled by fear could not allow such a legacy to exist. Humanity's choice to stand beside them had not only revived the vaults, but restored their purpose. Among the outcasts, the revelation brought healing. Elders who had carried centuries of guilt now understood that their people's destruction had not been in vain. Their refusal to unleash their knowledge as weapons had not been weakness, but strength. The younger generation, once torn between silence and revelation, found their path. With humanity's guidance, they vowed to use their legacy not to dominate, but to protect, continuing the work their ancestors had begun. They would no longer wander, no longer beg for shelter. They would stand as keepers of sanctuary. For humanity, the battle had changed more than strategy. It had reshaped their place in the galaxy. They had been underestimated before, dismissed as latecomers, fragile compared to the great empires. But now, the galaxy had seen them rise not through conquest, but through conviction. Their fleets had held, their people had stood, and their word had proven stronger than any weapon. The coalition's retreat left a message no empire could ignore. Humanity was not to be underestimated, not because of their size or their fleets, but because of the bond they created with those others had cast aside. On Earth, voices that once protested the decision to protect the outcasts fell silent. Images of human soldiers fighting alongside alien refugees spread across every network. Footage of the vault's shields glowing over colonies became a symbol of defiance and hope. Even those who had doubted could not deny what had been achieved. A fragile race once seen as a burden had become the reason humanity had risen higher than anyone believed possible. Still, questions lingered. What of the other vaults, now awakened by the signal? Where were they, and what else might they hold? The coalition had not been defeated completely, only scattered. Their hatred remained, and their fear of what humanity and the outcasts represented would not fade easily. Humanity's leaders knew this was not the end of danger, but the beginning of a new era where they would always be watched, always be tested. Yet instead of dread, there was resolve. The galaxy had changed, and humanity had changed with it. The smaller stories found their endings too. The officer who had seen maps hidden in the outcast's art was proven right. Those patterns pointed, not to weapons, but to sanctuaries scattered across forgotten stars. The doctor who had discovered their strange biology now understood. They had been shaped to endure, to adapt, to survive long enough to pass their legacy forward. Even the farmers who had built a beacon of light above their colony watched it, now burn brighter than ever, no longer a symbol of defiance alone, but of unity. The outcasts themselves transformed in subtle ways. Where once they trembled, they now walked with heads held higher. They sang their songs openly, their haunting melodies no longer whispers of grief, but hymns of memory and renewal. Children who had once flinched at every sound of engines now chased human children through the fields, their laughter ringing into skies once filled only with fear. They were still fragile, still gentle, but no longer helpless. They had become part of something greater. Humanity, too, found something in return. In choosing to protect the weak, they had discovered a strength within themselves that no empire had ever understood. They realized that their true power was not in their ships or their weapons, but in the bonds they forged, the promises they kept. They had shown the galaxy that compassion could be as mighty as conquest, and that protecting the helpless could change the order of the stars. And yet, the final twist remained. Deep within the vault's systems, hidden beyond even the knowledge of the outcasts, a final message had been left by those who had built it. When deciphered, it revealed not instructions or technology, but a warning. We built sanctuaries not because we feared empires, but because something greater was coming, something older than us all. Humanity and the outcasts alike read the words in silence, realizing that their battle had been only the first step in a much larger story. The coalition had sought to destroy them out of fear, but perhaps the real threat had yet to awaken. For now, though, there was peace. The colonies rebuilt. The wounded healed. Ships were repaired, and soldiers finally rested. Humanity and the outcasts stood side by side, no longer protector and protected, but allies bound by trust. They knew challenges still waited, enemies still lurked, and mysteries still stirred in the dark. But they also knew that when the time came, they would face it together. The galaxy had outcast one fragile race, and humanity had answered their call. In doing so, both had been transformed. Where once there had been weakness, there was now strength. Where once there had been exile, there was now belonging. And where once there had been fear, there was now hope. In the end, humanity had not only kept its promise, they had rewritten the meaning of power in the galaxy. The stars, once silent witnesses, now carried a new truth. That even in the darkest void, compassion could shine brighter than fire, and that when the weak called for protection, humanity would answer, no matter the cost. The war was over. The story of exile and protection had reached its end, but the legacy it left behind would echo across the stars for generations, a reminder that strength was not found in domination, but in the courage to stand for those who could not stand alone. And in that courage, humanity had found its place among the stars.